Hey guys, this is Anthony Morganti from AnthonyMorganti.com. This is episode 1 of Introduction to Macro Photography. In this video series, I'm going to talk about everything you need to get started in macro photography. Now, in this, the first episode, I'm going to give you an overview of some of the equipment we're going to use in the series and what we're going to do in future episodes. Now, first of all, camera. Camera's probably the least important thing. You could take some great macro images with a smartphone, and if you get one of those macro attachments for your smartphone, you could take some better macro images. If you have a pocket camera that has a macro mode, you could take macro images. So don't let the fact that you might not have a DSLR or a really expensive camera dissuade you from trying to get into macro photography. Nowadays, just about any camera can take great macro images. Now, in this series, I will be using 3 different types of cameras. I will be using a mirrorless camera. That will be in the next episode. I don't have it with me now, but I'll be using a Fujifilm X-T1, taking some macro shots with that. I'll also be using a crop sensor DSLR like this Nikon D7000, and I will be using a full frame camera like this Nikon D800E. But again, the camera isn't as important as you think it might be. But I'll try to, let's say I'm using the mirrorless camera, I will talk about some of the things you could do with other types of cameras as we go. Now, usually you need to light your subject. We will talk about existing light and what you could do with existing light, but usually you have to light the subject in some way. And it doesn't really have to get super expensive. The next episode, I'm just going to use a desk lamp, a gooseneck desk lamp, and it's going to light the subject wonderfully, you'll see. So you could get, a $20 book light and it will light the subject, and we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about flashlights. You could use a flashlight and do some light painting, and we'll do that in a future episode. Now, you could also use like the pop-up flash in the camera. There's some limitations to that, but I'll talk about that, and I'll explain the limitations, and I'll explain some slight modifications you could do with that pop-up flash, which will help it work more effectively for a macro shot. Now, if you really want to spend the money, you should get a ring light, and we will be doing an episode where I'll be using a ring light. Ring lights offer a nice flat light on a macro scene. Generally work great. I really use the ring light almost all the time when I'm doing my own macro shots. This specific one I have is a Sigma, and the reason why I like it, it actually has 2 independent flash tubes, and I could adjust the power of them independently from one another. And because I could do that, I could actually make this macro light a bit directional. So I could have this flash tube, let's say, much more powerful than this flash tube, or I could have this side off altogether, and it will give me more of a directional light. So there are a lot of advantages to this specific Sigma ring flash that I like, and that's why I got that. And we'll be talking about that in future episodes. Now, you really need to keep your camera steady when you're doing a macro shot. You're focusing so close, every tiny little movement and vibration will affect the image. So, because of that, you should use a tripod. And there's some specific features in certain tripods which are advantageous to the macro photographer. And I'll be talking about that in the next episode. Things that you should look for in a tripod if you're interested in getting into macro photography. Also, going along with that, you typically don't want to just put your hand on the camera while it's on the tripod and press the shutter. You just add that kind of little bit of vibration to the shot. So we're going to talk about things like mirror up. We're going to talk about the timer that's in the camera. Use that if you don't have, let's say, a remote. We're going to use wired remotes. We could use wireless remotes. So we'll be talking about all this stuff in future episodes. How to get really well-focused, sharp images, and those things that go along that help you do that, such as a tripod, remotes, timers, things like that. Now, to focus close, most interchangeable lens cameras, be it a DSLR or mirrorless camera, most of the lenses you could get for those types of cameras can't by themselves achieve focus if you're very close to the subject. They have a minimum focus distance, and usually it's pretty far away. So you need to do something to those lenses to allow them to focus when your camera is almost right on top of something. And the cheapest thing you could get is a macro filter. They usually come in sets of 4 usually, and each one is increases in magnification over the one before it. So you get one that's like a 1x magnification, then one that's 2x, little more magnification, 4x, and finally like a 10x macro filter. And as I mentioned, this is probably the cheapest way you could get into macro photography if you have either a mirrorless camera or a DSLR, and or any camera that has a lens that accepts threaded lens filters. This is the way to go. And I'll be talking about that in the next episode. We'll be using a mirrorless camera with a gooseneck desk lamp to light the scene, and we'll be using these macro lens filters. And you'll see, you'll be able to take some great images with just that, which is probably about the cheapest thing you could get to attach to a lens to allow it to focus closer. Now the next thing you could get, which costs a little more, are extension tubes. And usually these come in sets of 3. Now these vary in price widely. You can get some really cheap ones that really just push the lens away from the sensor. And when you push the lens away from the sensor, you're going to be able to just focus closer. You're going to be able to bring the camera closer to the subject to focus. And those cheap ones don't have any contacts or any wiring in them. And the problem you'll have is that the camera will not be able to communicate with the lens, so you'll lose autofocus, and you'll lose the ability for the camera to tell the lens what aperture you have it set at. So you dial in f11 on your camera cannot communicate that to the lens for the lens to set itself at f11. Now there are some lenses available that have a ring on them where you could actually dial in f11. That would be great, but in most lenses nowadays don't have that ring anymore. So my suggestion is you buy spend a little more money on your extension tube, and you get these that actually have wiring and contacts on them. This specific brand is Kenko, K-E-N-K-O, and this allows the camera to communicate to the lens. So your camera will autofocus and it will set the aperture. So you can use just about any normal lens with these extension tubes. And the neat thing about extension tubes is you could stack them. Now this one will give you more magnification than this one because you're pushing the lens a little further away. And when you stack them, you're getting now even, pushed further away even more. And then if I even add this one, then it's pushing the lens even further away, and I could really focus close. So we're going to be having an episode where we're going to be taking some images with extension tubes. Now, another thing is kind of an odd thing. This is called a reverse ring adapter. What this allows you to do is to take your lens and mount it backwards on the camera. When you mount a lens backwards, you could focus really, really close. Now, as you might imagine, if you do flip your lens around and mount it backwards, you're not going to be able to autofocus anymore, and you're not going to be able to set the aperture. So this specific one I bought, why I like it, is you could manually spin it to set your aperture. Now, the disadvantage is there's really no markings on here, so you don't know if you're dialing in f8 or f11. You just are kind of spinning it and doing an experiment. So you really have to experiment with this and try to get proper exposure. But once you have it set and you have proper exposure for the lighting you're using, you usually don't have to touch it anymore. You'll have to manually focus, but this will allow you to focus really, really close. Now, I use this with a 50mm lens, and it works great. And we will have an episode where we're using a reverse ring. We'll talk about that. Now, if you're really into macro photography and you want to spend the money, you could get lenses that are specifically made for macro photography, and they're appropriately called macro lenses. Unless you're in the Nikon world, Nikon calls them micro lenses. They're the same thing. A macro lens and a micro lens are the same thing. Now, I have this Tokina macro lens. It's 100mm. We're going to be doing episodes where we'll be working with these lenses, and you'll probably hear me gush all the time about how great this lens is. This is one of my favorite lenses, and you'll see when we use it. And I will be doing, in that same episode, I'll be using this 40mm Nikon micro lens. Now, this is a DX lens, which means it works best with a crop sensor camera like this Nikon D7000. It will work with the D800. It just will have vignette on it, or I'll have to set the D800 to crop sensor mode to use this. But it is very, very reasonable. It's a super cheap lens, and it works great. So if you have a crop sensor camera, crop sensor Nikon, you could get this 40mm Nikon micro lens, and it will work great. So, you know, that's kind of from cheapest to most expensive. The cheapest being the lens filters, moving through the extension tube, the reverse ring adapter, to the actual macro lenses. Now, the neat thing is, with some of these, you could use them together, meaning you could use extension tubes on a macro lens, and you will be able to focus super, super close. And we'll be doing an episode where we'll be combining things. Now, this is what I'll be covering. There are other things you could use for macro photography. There's like bellows and things like that. We'll talk about it, but we're not going to actually have episodes where I'll be using them. So, you know, this is meant as an introduction to macro photography to help get you started, to help give you some ideas on how to compose images, and how to use lighting to light the images. We're also going to be doing some tricks. I have some ideas and some things I do to like mist flowers and to add those little droplets where you get like upside down images of something behind it, like a flower behind it, or a bug or something like that. And I'm going to show you how you could do all that. So I'm really excited about doing this macro photography video series. I hope you don't mind. I have to ask, this is the worst part of me doing videos recently. I'm asking for your help. All my videos will always be free. I'm not threatening to ever make them pay videos or anything like that. They're always going to be free. But I do need your help. I'd like to upgrade the things that I do to create the videos. For instance, my camera that I use to make the video, I'd like to upgrade that. I just use a consumer grade camera. When I can, I'll use the DSLRs to film, but I would prefer to use an actual video camera. I'd also like to expand the scope of what I'm doing. I want to get out in the field and do things with multiple cameras, with models, with landscape photography, things like that, out in the field. And I'd also like to do some stuff in the studio here. I'd like to do a video series on studio photography, everything you need to know about studio photography. But I really do need your help. I'm not a bazillionaire, and I do okay with my photography business, and I'm proud of it. But if you could help me out, go to my website. At the very top, you'll see I need your help. Just click on that. There's all different ways you could help, and a couple of them won't cost you any money. If you shop at Amazon.com, if you shop at B&H Photo, if you use my affiliate link, I'll make a small percentage of your sale, and it doesn't cost you any more. If you could pledge $1 a month on Patreon, that will help. There's all different ways I have listed there that you could help. So if you like what I do and you could help, just go to my website, the very top. I need your help, and I'd appreciate if you could help me out. All right, that's it for the first episode. Thank you, everyone, for listening to that. And thank you for watching my videos. I really do appreciate it. I'll talk to you guys soon.